I'd like to begin our evening, if you could all rise, pledge to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please take seats. Welcome and congratulations to our Early College Academy acceptees. It's wonderful to have you here. Without further ado, my name is John Neese. I'd like to welcome everyone, and I would like to turn it over to our board president, Ms. Maria Vitalato. Thank you.
Just like to thank everyone for attending. Congratulations to the students on this very unique and wonderful educational opportunity in a partnership with Bayonne High School District and Hudson Community College. We thank our partners at Hudson Community College and our school and our Bayonne School District for all their hard work in making this happen. Students have the opportunity to concurrently earn an Associates of Art degree from Hudson Community College while also meeting the requirements to obtain a New Jersey high school diploma. The early college program is designed to provide highly capable students with access to higher education experiences throughout 9th through 12th grade. Bayonne students will gain access to higher level courses at a post-secondary school. We, the Board of Education, are just elated to be able to offer this great program to the children of Bayonne. Thank you. We'd like Chris Ward to come up and say from Chris Ward. Our partner from Hudson Community College.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'd like to bring up, invite up to the podium my boss, the provost of Hudson County Community College. He oversees all of the academic programs. He oversees everything at the college that is related to the courses that you are taking. And in 4 years, when you're walking across the stage and you're getting your high school diploma and your college associate degree, it's very likely you're going to be shaking his hand. I'd like to invite up Dr. Eric Friedman, Provost of Hudson County Community College.
Good evening, everyone. So happy to see students. What an honor to be with you this evening. So we're here on behalf of the Early College Program, which Ms. Filardo already described a little bit. It's an opportunity for Bayonne High School students to take real credit-bearing college courses and earn an Associate of Arts degree from Hudson County Community College, free of cost, thank you to the district, while earning their high school diploma. Students will take all of their HCCC classes at Bayonne High School during their first 2 years. In their third year, students will travel to the college for half of their college coursework, and in their fourth year, students will attend Hudson County Community College for the majority of the classes. Together, we're putting students on a path to success. This September, 26 incoming Bayonne High School freshmen will be initiated in the early college program. On behalf of all of us at the college, thank you for being partners with us on this meaningful program that will make a real difference for students, their families, saving time and considerable expense while enabling success. And just let me say that this May, with another school district, we have 11 students who are going to be crossing the stage and graduating concurrently with a high school and a college degree. And it is really, really exciting. We look forward to being there at Red Bull Stadium. And this is the model that we're using here in Bayonne. And it really, you can do it. You will do it, you can do it, and it's going to give you a leg up. And we're looking forward to being your mentors as you move along this process. Thank you so much to everyone who has had a hand in this.
At this time, I would like to invite our trustees and the Hudson County Community College for a ceremonial signing of our partnership with the Bayonne Board of Education and Hudson County Community College. So trustees, please, and come on up.
That's a great idea. Guys, who maybe want to get a picture with the kids up there. Yeah, those are the kids. Sure. Some of the kids.
Yes, we do. Now, so
All the kids,
all
come on.
you students with your
Stand up, come on up. Oh, you guys are the ones that are in the program. Come on, come on up. Yeah. You guys are going to do all real work.
A roll call. Trustee Alonso. Trustee Broderick is absent. Trustee Burke. Trustee Cassius. Trustee Egan.
Here.
Trustee Finnerty. Here. Trustee Wilbeck.
Here.
Vice President Munoz.
Here.
Here. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our New Jersey School Board representative, Marianne Friedman, was nice enough to join us tonight. She has a presentation on board ethics. She's visiting us tonight, and she will also be back in April for our April meeting. So at this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Marianne.
Oh, I haven't done anything yet. So thank you for having me. You have a packet in front of you, and on the right-hand side is the PowerPoint for this evening, and on the left-hand side is the Code of Ethics, and on the back of it is an acknowledgement of receipt. So after we're done with this, with the PowerPoint, if you could fill this out, you need to print your name. Today's date is the February 25th, 2020, and then sign it. And then if you can give that to Dr. Maida, he can include it in his information for your CUSAC review. Okay? So thank you for inviting me in. My name is Marianne Friedman. I'm your field service representative. I know I've spoken to some of you on the phone. Hi, Michael. And it's good to be in Bayonne on a rainy night. We're going to go right into school ethics, and the weather was not good the last time I was here. I do remember certain things like that, and it was very, very windy when I came the last time. So we're going to talk about the School Ethics Act, and you can follow along with the PowerPoint if you'd like, or you can follow along with the packet that's in your the PowerPoint that's in your packet. So the School Ethics Act was established in 1992, and it really was because the legislature felt it was essential that the conduct of school administrators and school board members was essential to hold the respect and the confidence of the people and of your community. And it also developed conflicts of interest. It developed the penalties for violating the public trust or a justifiable impression would hold. And so the School Ethics Act ensured and preserved the public's confidence. To ensure and preserve the public's confidence, school board members would be held to specific standards, and those standards are listed in the code. That's what the Code of Ethics is, that should help to guide your conduct. So I usually say if you're looking for what your, as a board member, what your role and responsibility is, you really don't need to look much further than the Code of Ethics, and we're going to go through these. The provisions in the Code of Ethics also apply to charter school trustees as well, and administrators. So in CUSAC, CUSAC is your Quality Single Accountability Continuum, which is the monitoring system that New Jersey uses. There is a governance section, governance indicator to ensure transparency and critical and ethical conduct of Board of Education members. And included in that are the personal and financial disclosure forms that you fill out. So new board members would have filled those out, most likely already. And then anybody who is already a board member needs to fill those out and complete those by April 15th. It's a completely online process now, and so you'll get an email for notification from the School Ethics Commission, and for tonight's purposes, the SEC is the School Ethics Commission, not the Securities and Exchange Commission. And just to clear that up right off the bat. And so the financial disclosure forms are not for you to have to disclose the amounts of money that you make or people in your household make. It's merely where the money in your household comes from, so that the Ethics Commission can take a look at that and see if there might be any conflicts of interest with anything that you're doing as a school board member. You also need to have an ethics conversation every year, an ethics discussion, and that's what we're doing tonight. And that's why you're going to give those forms to Dr. Maida, and he'll include those in his CUSAC file for your next go-around. And then you would list the names of anybody who has been found in violation of the School Ethics Act or the Code of Ethics would need to be listed when CUSAC comes around. So the School Ethics Act really did establish the School Ethics Commission, the Code of Ethics, which came 9 years later in 2001. It established conflicts of interest, disclosure statements that we just talked about, financial, relative, and personal, relative, and financial, and then training requirements for board members. And training requirements are in your first year of your first term. A term is a 3-year term. You would go to new board member orientation. That's Governance 1. In the second year of your first term, you'll go to Governance 2, which is finance. And then in year 3 of your first term, you would go to Governance 3, which is student achievement. And then any re-elected or reappointed year, you would go to Governance 4, which is legal updates. So this talks about a little bit further the required training in your first year of your first term. You'll find out what skills are necessary to serve and what knowledge is necessary for you to serve. You'll hear about CUSAC, which is the Quality Single Accountability Continuum. You'll hear about the superintendent's evaluation process. And that I'm going to, when I come back in April, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And just know, Mr. Neese, right now it's not available online. But as I mentioned, I think you were at the Hudson County Roundtable when I talked about you can start developing your narratives and your comments in a Word document, excuse me, if you pull down the form, download the form from online, the resources are still there. And that way you can start working on that. Year 2 and Year 3 is Governance 2 and Governance 3. The only caveat with this is that you can, while you can go to any program at any time, you do have to take Gov 2, Gov 3, and Gov 4 in the time frame in which you're supposed to take it in order to get credit for the mandatory training and not be in violation of your mandatory training requirements. And then in Year 4 or any re-elected year, you'll take Governance 4, and that's legal updates, and they'll be able to share with you anything new that's happened legally or that's been mandated by the state in that year. There are 9 members of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Oh boy, I just said that we weren't doing that, and that's why it's in my head. The School Ethics Commission, there are 9 members. They're appointed by the governor for 3-year terms, and there can't be more than 5 from any one political party. 2 are school board members, 5 are non-school officials, and 2 are school administrators. And they meet once a month in Trenton. And the SEC really can provide you with 2 different things. They can provide you with an advisory opinion, and that's on something that hasn't happened yet. So for instance, when I ran for my board was back in the 90s. We had April elections then, and a gal that ran in the election alongside me, she came to the board in May right after we had reorganized, and she said, my husband's thinking of running for the town council. Would there be any conflicts of interest if he were to, would I have to step down as a board member? So we asked for an advisory opinion. They responded pretty quickly. It's usually within 2 months that they'll respond, and they gave us a list of things that either she would have to abstain from or recuse herself from, or that he would have to recuse himself from if the two bodies, the town council and the board, came together. And if you remember back in the day, when we had school budget elections in April, if your budget failed, you would go to the town council and you would ask that you be held, firm with your tax levy, or the township committee would be able to determine that they would like to take some money away. And there was usually a process for that. So if she was part of the group from the board to go to the town council, then her husband would have to recuse himself. If he wanted to be part of it, then she would need to recuse herself. So there were a couple of things. There was shared services, there was any kind of land acquisition that we might be doing, and the budget, if the budget went down. So anything that is proposed or that might not happen or that hasn't happened yet, you could ask for an advisory opinion on. Then for an ethics complaint, that's something that has already happened. Anybody can file an ethics complaint against anybody on the board. And this is something where, somebody could just be passing through your town, come to a board meeting and say, I think they violated the code, somebody violated the code of ethics, and they could file a complaint. Both of the forms for this and the process for this is on the DOE website, and you can take a look at those. They are pretty involved, and that's by design, so that somebody can't just go home and say, I was upset with this board member because they did something and I'm going to file an ethics complaint against them, and it's done in 10 minutes. It's a very procedural kind of a thing. There's evidence that needs to be obtained and things like that. So it's a process by design so that flagrant violator charges aren't filed. Okay? So one of the latest advisory opinions that was issued in 2019 was about a newly elected board member who drove a bus for the transportation company that provided the district's students with busing. And the member had no ownership other than his financial benefit through his salary, other than his pay. He wasn't supervised by district staff or district administration, but he could request that a driver be removed from the district routes. The administration could request. The driver may have had to have written a report for a student that was misbehaving or had an incident on the bus and give direction to district aides on the bus. But other than that, there was no he didn't own the bus company. He was a driver for the bus company. So they asked for an advisory opinion, and the SEC concluded that the member was a private employee of a contracted service doing his job that caused casual contact with the students and possibly with some staff, but he had very limited authority over students or staff. And so they suggested and recommended that he refrain from any involvement in discussion or any votes that were taken about that bus company in terms of transportation or any changes with that or any students on the route. But other than that, there was no conflict. Okay? So the penalties that are issued by the SEC for a violation have to do with, there's 4. There's a reprimand that's really a rebuke by the commissioner. There's a censure, which is a formal disapproval by the commissioner, and has to be publicized by adoption by the board through a resolution. There's suspension. The length is recommended by the SEC and then decided by the commissioner. And then removal. Removal from office is pretty limited. It doesn't happen all that often. And the SEC makes the recommendation to the commissioner, and then the commissioner either agrees with or decides against that. And any appeals are actually heard by the appellate division. So we're going to go through the 10 tenets of the Code of Ethics. The first one is I will uphold and enforce all laws, rules, and regulations pertaining to the State Board, and court orders pertaining to schools. Desired changes shall be brought about only through legal and ethical procedures. So this is really about making sure that you're upholding, and when you're sworn in, part of your swearing in ceremony or your statement is that you will uphold and enforce all laws pertaining to state and federal regulations. You also want to make sure that you're following your own policies because they're kind of like your local laws. So you want to make sure that when you're looking at a resolution to be passed or an action item to be passed, that there's policy behind that and that the action doesn't violate any policy. So we talk about policy, and I used to say, nobody in your community expects you to know every policy in your policy book. I've amended that to say no reasonable person will expect you to know all of the policies in your policy book. Because when I got on my board in 1998 or 1999, we had 3 5-inch ringed binders that were given to us. This was before the glory days of the internet and electronic records and things like that. And so I remember getting that and thinking, oh my gosh, how am I possibly going to do this? But you have all of this stuff available electronically to you now. You need to know how to search for a policy, you need to know how to find it, and you need to know how to direct other people to it. And you should be looking and reviewing policies on a regular basis, and you probably do that at every board meeting anyway. So those are kind of your local laws. So the second tenet is to make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of all of the children and seek to develop and maintain public schools that meet the individual needs of all children regarding their ability, race, sex, creed, or social standing. And so you want to make sure that you're not just advocating for one specific group. You want to make sure that you are thinking about yourselves as being in a hot air balloon once you're a board member. You've gone up over Bayonne, and you're looking down, and all of the students in Bayonne are in your care. And so you need to do what's in the best interest of all of the students, regardless of any particular standing that they might have. When you're a parent or a community member in the school district, you tend to look at the district through a microscope, how it impacts my kid, how it impacts my neighbor or my best friend's kids, my nieces or my nephews or my grandchildren. This is now going up in that hot air balloon and being at, how many feet does a hot air balloon go up? A couple of thousand, right? Maybe? I don't know. But being above Bayonne and looking down over all of the students and saying all of these kids are in our care. The third is to confine my board action to policy making, planning, and appraisal, and to help frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted those who will be affected by them. So if you have an opportunity to engage your community members or your stakeholder groups when you're developing policies, those that will be affected by them, that's obviously something that this tenant is talking about. That's a wonderful opportunity for your community members, your parents, and your staff to be a part of that process and to be able to give you feedback. So that's a good thing to have also. Carrying out your responsibility not to administer the schools, but together with your fellow board members to see that they're well run. This is purely about micromanagement. You have hired a superintendent and an administrative team to manage the district on a day-to-day basis. So they are the people who are charged with that. Asking questions is not micromanagement. Micromanagement is attempting to do the work that somebody else is paid in the district to do. Okay, so if somebody comes to you with a transportation issue, you may want to refer them back to the bus driver or back to the principal of the school or the transportation coordinator. Then it could go to the assistant superintendent or the superintendent. And then if there's no resolution, it would come to the board. And it comes to the board, and if you've participated in any way other than referring somebody to the chain of command, which you should be doing, and you need to know what that chain is. So that would be your chain for transportation. For parents, if it's a staff member or a teacher, you would want them to talk to the teacher first. And you're doing this because I'm referring them to that chain because the chain of command are the only people who can help to resolve the issue. You can't as a board member because you're only a board member when you're seated here at a legally advertised meeting with a quorum of the board, right? You learned that this past weekend. So that's the caveat there. So after tonight you have on all your superpower capes, your Superman and Superwomen capes, and Dr. Maid is going to collect those before you leave, because once the meeting is adjourned, you no longer have any superpowers other than anybody else in this community, okay? So you want to make sure that you're not doing something that somebody else in the district has been hired to do. And I can give you an example. I met with the board several years ago. It was a smaller district, about 1,000 kids, talking about the chain of command. And one of the board members said, so if somebody calls me with a transportation problem, you're saying that I'm not supposed to handle that. And I said, that's right. You would have, if you have a transportation coordinator, they could go to the bus driver, to the principal, transportation coordinator. Well, we're small. We don't have a transportation coordinator. I said, okay, so are you the chair of the transportation committee? She said, no, not really. We have 2 people on the transportation committee because it was a small district, 5 board members. So I said, okay, give me an example then, because she wasn't really following me. She said, well, last week somebody called and said they had a problem with their bus route. Parent called. And so I grabbed another board member and we went out and drove the bus route. And we decided that that was not that she was right. We needed to change the bus route, so we changed the bus route. So usually if there's an attorney in the room, they're starting to have chest pain at this point, because that is not the role of a board member, okay? And your attorney would go crazy because the liability alone there. So I said, why are you doing bus routes? She said, well, I do the bus routes for all of the students every year. So the top of my head almost blew off. Got myself together and I said, okay, that's really not your responsibility and it's not your role. And in a smaller district like that, it was the BA's responsibility because they're usually responsible for facilities, finance, and transportation, and buildings and grounds. And so the BA, who was very new, looked at me and said, thanks, you just gave me another job. And I said, well, I bet you if you look at your job description, you'll see that that's in there. And he called me the next day and he said, I'm really sorry, I spoke out of turn, you're right, it is in my job description. So that board member then turned to me and said, because now, once you've said to somebody something that they've been doing and that they apparently have liked doing, and now you're saying that it's not really their role or responsibility, you don't know how easily it's going to be for them to give that up. And she said, I just don't know what I'm going to do. And I said, with what? She said, all the time. I've been spending about 20 hours a week on transportation issues. Not her job. Okay, so if somebody else in the district is being paid for something that you're thinking about doing, don't do it. That's micromanagement. Okay, recognize that authority rests with the Board of Education. Make no personal promises or take any private action that may compromise the board. This is about making sure that you're, folks that are brand new to the board, you may have people come up to you at the supermarket or at the pizza parlor or whatever and say, I got my whole development or I got my whole block or my whole area to vote for you, so you kind of owe me now, and this is what I'd like you to do. That's not your job, okay? You can bring that information to the superintendent and let them know. Oh, and also with the chain of command, if you're referring somebody back to the chain of command, what you want to do after that is give the superintendent a call, shoot him an email or a text message, however you all have decided you communicate, and let him know that so-and-so called, problem with XYZ, and you referred them back through the chain of command, because that absolves you and it lets the superintendent know that you've done your due diligence as well. Okay? Refuse to surrender my independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups, or to use the schools for personal gain or for the gain of or of yourself or for others. This is about, again, making sure that you're not tied to any partisan groups or any political groups. You can be tied to those groups, but when you sit at this board table, that all stays outside. You are here as a board member, you are nonpartisan, you have to do what's in the best interest of all of the students, regardless of your political affiliation or any other affiliations that you may have. So you're always looking to do what's in the best interest of all of the children. Okay, was there a question? No, okay. Holding confidential all matters pertaining to the schools, which if disclosed would needlessly injure individuals or the schools. In all other matters, I'll provide accurate information, and in concert with my fellow board members, interpret to the staff and the aspirations of the community for the school. So this is making sure that when you go into executive session, what happens in executive session stays in executive session. I think everybody probably can remember, I don't think anybody's too young to not remember that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Think about that. What happens in executive session has to stay there. So if somebody's not able to be there because they may have a conflict of interest, it doesn't mean that you call them on your way home and say, this is what you missed. The conflicts of interest were developed to protect 3 entities: the board member, the board, and the district. Okay? Sharing that information with them can make them suspect or liable to improper actions, and you don't want to set yourself up or set anybody else up to be possibly accused of of a perceived conflict of interest. So if there's a conflict of interest, there's a reason you're not there. Respect that. Understand it's for your protection as well as for the board and for the district's protection. And there are certain things by statute and by law, by mandate, that you have to use go into executive session for, mostly personnel, student issues, and negotiations, and then there's a list of other things as well. I'll vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the Chief Administrative Officer. This one is big. The confidentiality and also the personnel issues are the two things that typically board members can get in trouble with. Not holding information confidential is one, and then delving into things that have to do with matters of personnel. Everything that comes to you at the board table in terms of an action item or a resolution has to come at the recommendation of the superintendent. I have a great piece in here on the left-hand side, asked and answered, when can a board member participate in personnel interviews? It's very quick, easy to read. There's a couple of things on the left side that I think you'll find interesting. And basically, the SEC is recommending that board members not be part of interviews for anybody but the superintendent. And that's only barring any conflicts, if you don't have a conflict of interest in searching for the superintendent. And I know you guys had 5 members that could participate in the superintendent search with the last superintendent search, and welcome Mr. Neese again, because I'm very glad to see you. So every item that comes to you comes at the recommendation of the chief school administrator, of the superintendent. The only thing that wouldn't come to you at the recommendation of the superintendent is if you were hiring a new superintendent. So his recommendation came at the recommendation of the board. Okay, but otherwise everything's going to come to you at the recommendation of the chief school administrator, because he's the one with the educational background, the certification, the experience, and the knowledge and the training to be able to provide you with the highest qualified people that will fit best in your district. Because remember, he's going to get the district's going to get lots of applications for any personnel opening that you might have. And by the time they get up to his level, he's going to need to be really looking to see who's going to be the best fit for the district. Because most of the people that are going to apply for jobs today are actually qualified for those jobs. So he's going to have to really do a lot of work with his administrative staff, with the principals and such, that when people get to him, they're going to be a good fit, and he has to determine which one is the best fit for your district. Okay, questions about personnel and interviews? Okay. I'll support and protect school personnel and proper performance of their duties. This is making sure that when you're at the soccer field, whether you're at the baseball field, the basketball court, for a game or any kind of event that's going on, that you're making sure that you're being very careful not to talk about staff. This can get you into trouble. You're people who care deeply about your communities and about the kids in your community. And so sometimes what may be stated as, well, my daughter had a really difficult time with Mrs. Smith last year. Now because you're a board member becomes to somebody else, well, that person is a board member, so they must know something about Mrs. Smith, that she's not a very good teacher. That wasn't what the person said at all, but that's how it can be perceived. So just be really, really careful. You don't lose your First Amendment rights when you become a board member, but there are repercussions and ramifications to them once you are a board member, because people will think that you have additional information that may elevate your opinion or your statement in some way. Okay? And then refer all complaints to the Chief Administrative Officer. Act on them only at a public meeting after failure of an administrative solution. So this is that chain of command thing that we were talking about before, that process. It goes up to the superintendent. If the parent or community member or staff member doesn't feel that the issue's been resolved, then they would bring it to the Board of Education, not to you as an individual board member, but to the Board of Ed, and then you would have that meeting. By the way, resolution doesn't necessarily mean that the person got what they wanted. It may mean that they understand why they can't get what they wanted. Okay, there's a big difference there, because sometimes you just can't get everything you want. Okay, so these are some commissioner decisions that came down in 2019. A board member shared information about a student discipline incident with his immediate family, which was then shared with countless others. Is that a violation? What do you think? Yes, it is, and they were censured. A board member approached a subordinate employee of the superintendent to inquire if she would be interested in assuming the position of superintendent, even though the job was not vacant. That's also. Now, I do need to tell you that the things that we talk about here are things that have actually happened in New Jersey, okay? Yes. We are not we are not nearly creative enough in New Jersey school boards to come up with the stuff that actually does happen here. Okay? So that member violated 2 tenets and was reprimanded. A board member attended a local teachers union meeting without board approval, told the teachers that they had the board support and that the board was exploring all options to remove the superintendent. Violation? Yes. This person
Heads up on that, all right?
this person was suspended for 60 days.
That's it.
Okay, this one's one of my favorites. During a traffic stop, a member presents herself as a board member, indicates her relationship to a local official, and used inappropriate language. Do you know who I am, officer? That was a violation also. A couple of tenants there and a 30-day suspension. This one's good too. This one's up at the top because there's a lot of tenants that were violated in this that are all going to come down. So I've already tipped my hat and told you this is definitely a violation. A board member's wife is a teacher in the school, and that board member owns a business near the school, so he's regularly in and out of the school without following the visitation policy or procedures. He also met with the school secretary to encourage him, the school secretary, to make a statement that the school secretary was being blackmailed by administration to keep an incident hidden. That was definitely a violation. You probably can't even read all of these things, but for the not following the visitation policies, there were several tenets of the Code of Ethics that were violated, and meeting separately with the school secretary, there were certainly several sections of tenets of the Code of Ethics that were violated as well. Any questions so far before I go into conflicts of interest? Clear as mud? Say no. You don't want anything to be clear as mud. You want it to be crystal clear, right? Okay, that was a trick question. Okay, so conflicts of interest. Recuse yourself if there's a benefit to you as a school official or your immediate family. Excuse me. So if you have there's a conflict of interest if you have a business interest in something that's happening, using the position to secure unwanted privileges, financial involvement, gift or favor, offered with the intent to influence, personal involvement that creates a benefit, or service or employment that may prejudice your independent judgment. And you would have no discussion on those matters if any of those things apply to you, or any participation in the vote. Okay? And an immediate family member, by definition, is a spouse, civil union, or domestic partner, dependent child, residing in the same household. Now, a relative is much broader and has been much more expanded. So you can see the accountability regulation definition of a relative is a spouse, civil union, or domestic partner, a parent or a step-parent, a child, stepchild, son or daughter-in-law, grandparent, grandchild, siblings, stepbrothers, stepsisters, half-brothers, half-sisters, aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews, and even cousins sometimes. And this is whether related to the school official or their spouse by blood, marriage, or adoption. So it's really very expanded. So if you have a family member who works in the district, what we always suggest is that you let your board attorney know that as soon as possible. And then we recommend that the board attorneys keep a list of every board member who has a family member who works in the district and what their relationship is to that person, whether it's immediate family member or relative. And then your board attorney can help you know when you need to step aside and recuse yourself from different actions. And sometimes your business administrator and your BA will help with that too. And then if you have family members who work or relatives who work in another district in New Jersey that are under the same union, okay, the NJEA, the same umbrella of the NJEA, you would be not able to participate in some things also, okay, mostly negotiations, okay?
And even if you're under AFT?
Yeah, because that's all considered part of the umbrella. And when
I wanted her to clarify that. That's all. She said NJEA, umbrella of NJEA.
Well, what ends up happening is you don't want a board member who has a relative in another district to participate in negotiations because they might be accused of elevating your salaries, your benefits, or whatever, benefits to your district, because the other district is going to use your district as an example. And that happens all the time. Okay, that's part of the strength of the NJEA. They're very, very talented and skilled at what they do. And that's not a bad thing. It's just you have to be aware of it. And you don't want a board member to be accused of, well, you only said yes to this high contract with the teachers because your sister works, you know, in Middlesex County, and you knew that that might up their salaries as well. Okay? So you also, now that you're a board member, superintendent cannot hire somebody who's a relative of yours. If you already have a relative that's working in the district, you can run for the board, but then you would be, you'd need to recuse yourself from certain things that I'm going to go through in a minute. If the relative already works in the district, you're not going to be able to be part of negotiations. You're not going to be able to be part of the superintendent's hiring process, the search firm for a new superintendent, superintendent's evaluation, or anything that has to do personnel related to the superintendent or to anyone in the chain of supervision above your family member or relative. Okay, so if they're a teacher, you're not going to be able to participate in principal negotiations or in, you know, administrators negotiations. You also wouldn't be able to participate in anything that had to do with the principal that was over your family member, or supervisors or assistant superintendent. So it's the chain of supervision all the way up to the superintendent. Okay, you would not be able to take part in the discussion or in the vote for those things. So now we get to collective bargaining.
One question on that, please.
Yes.
With regard to relative, what happens in the case of a divorce?
I would say that you need to check with your board attorney, because there have been some developments from the SEC where if somebody is still receiving, if there's alimony or financial, any kind of financial involvement still with the ex-spouse, there can be a problem with participating in some of those things. So I would say check with your board attorney on that.
What about the event of a death?
A
relative spouse death. Are you still related to that former spouse?
To the spouse who's an in-law, who's not related to you.
Right.
I believe that there may still be an issue with that, but I would check with the board attorney as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We talked about it this weekend.
Yeah, only because your board attorney is the only person that you should be taking legal advice from. Okay, you can call us and we can share legal information with you. And up front, I'm not a lawyer and I've never played one on TV. So, you know, my information is limited to what I have. But even our attorneys at New Jersey school boards will tell you they can provide you with information, but not legal advice. Okay? And did you have something that you went from the weekend?
We talked about that specifically this weekend. They spoke about divorce, and if there was still a financial tie, I think it was like, it was on the chart, so I don't remember exactly.
Yeah,
but I know you guys produced something.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if there's still a financial relationship there with the ex-spouse, then you wouldn't be able to participate.
It was on a chart like the one
that we have. Yeah,
and I don't remember the exact chart.
Yeah,
at this point.
that's okay.
They definitely did. It's probably online now.
Yeah. So if you have if your spouse, dependent child, or non-dependent child, or a relative works in the district, you're not going to be able to participate in negotiations or in the ratification of the contract or anything to do with the salary guides.
What about if you had a roommate, like two people that live together, but they're not spouse or civil union, but they live together and they share bills? Would that be a conflict?
I would say it might be, and you should check with your board attorney. Okay, there are lots of specific things that go with each person. I had a board member ask me once, he wanted to participate in the superintendent's evaluation, and his sister worked in the district. And I said, unfortunately, you won't be able to do that. And he said, well, I haven't spoken to my sister in 10 years. I said, well, the SEC hasn't said if it's okay to do that if you haven't spoken to your sister in 10 years. You know, so there are lots of little individual circumstances that we don't know all the answers, that I certainly don't anyway. Yeah, I think that it has in the past, and I think that if there's a financial involvement, they will say that you would likely need to recuse yourself from that because of that financial involvement. Okay? So if a spouse, dependent child, or child that's not dependent or a relative works in the district, you can't participate in negotiations, and you wouldn't be able to participate in ratification of the contract. If you or your spouse or a dependent child work in another school district in the state, you would not be able to participate in negotiations, but you may be able to ratify the contract at the very end, after salary guides are done and all decisions have been made, if you have no, or your spouse or your relative, or your dependent child has no heightened union activity in their district. Okay, so if they're heightened activity, if they have heightened activity in their union in another district, then you're not going to be able to ratify the contract either. Okay? If you have a child that's not a dependent or a relative that works out of the district, you're probably going to be able to participate in negotiations, barring any other conflicts, that heightened involvement that we just talked about, and you'll likely be able to ratify the contract. Okay, so these are all things, because everybody's circumstances are just a tiny bit different, we really do suggest that you talk to your board attorney, and we do suggest that each board member makes a list of family members working in the district, what the relationship is to them, family members who work in other districts in the state, and what their relationship is to them, and give that to the board attorney. And anytime it changes, because sometimes, somebody might be working in another district and they move to California. Well, then it's not an issue anymore, okay? So make sure that you keep that with your board attorney. So other possible conflicts are if somebody is supervised by an employee in the unit, they're not in the unit, but the terms of their employment is linked to the unit, or their immediate family member or relative has heightened union involvement, which we talked about. There was a ruling by the SEC several years ago that said if a candidate for the board was endorsed by the Teachers Association of that school district, that they would not be able to participate in negotiations for the first year of their 3-year term. They are now looking at that on a case-by-case basis, because there have been some instances where the association has endorsed a candidate without the candidate's asking for that endorsement or even recognizing that endorsement, and it's kept them from being on negotiations by design, okay? There's lots of strategies that are at work in negotiations. And so they're taking it on a case-by-case basis. And if you can show that you didn't ask for that endorsement and that you never publicized that endorsement or utilized that endorsement, sometimes you can get away from that and be able to negotiate.
Marianne, so if an individual is not asking for the endorsement but gets it unwillingly or
Right.
unintentionally, are you still not allowed to participate in negotiations?
No, it's a case, now it's on a case-by-case basis. So now what you would do, if you were running for the school board and you were endorsed by the Teachers Association, you didn't ask for it, you didn't welcome it, you didn't want to participate in it at all, you could ask for an advisory opinion stipulating all the facts, and they would make a case-by-case decision. Okay, it's no longer just a blanket, no, you can't. Okay?
One final question. I know it sounds really weird. But
Nothing's weird in New Jersey.
It was brought to my attention. We have a number of very young board members, okay,
Mhm.
who do have dependent children who attend the schools in our district.
Mhm.
Does that impact their decision-making process when it comes to agreeing to certain programs that would directly impact their child? How does that come into play?
So, for instance, if the board was taking action on a recommendation tonight to approve, say you had a child in the district and they needed to be homeschooled, you would not be able to participate in that vote, okay? Because it's your child. It's directly impacting your child and your child alone. If it impacts other children, then, and not solely impacting your child, there shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so for instance, again, if you had a child in the band, say, and that child's uniform was destroyed by something, something happened, and it was presented to the board that we need to approve a new uniform for Mary Ann Friedman's daughter, but not for the whole band. If it's for the whole band that you're approving purchasing instruments or purchasing new uniforms or whatever, that's fine. If it's just for your child specifically, then you need to recuse.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Doctrine of necessity, this is only to be invoked when the board is not able to take action because so many people on the board have a conflict of interest. okay? And the SEC does not want, because years ago, this started to get crazy, and everybody started to invoke the doctrine of necessity. So now, there can be a committee of only one person, because remember, a committee makes recommendations to the board. They don't make decisions for the board. So there can be a committee of one. There can also be a committee of two non-conflicted members that may need to obtain the assistance of the superintendent or the business administrator and caucus about negotiations or things like that. But you don't need to invoke the doctrine unless 5 of a 9-member board are conflicted in one area, and then your attorney would invoke that doctrine. It's a resolution that's passed, and everybody who has a conflict of interest states what their conflicts are, and then everybody gets to jump in the pool. Okay? So just a quick conflicts of knowledge check. A relative is an immediate family member. True or false?
True.
False. An immediate family member is always a relative, but a relative is not necessary. It was a trick question. I apologize. I didn't make these up. I promise. I didn't come up with the quiz. The board may not employ a relative of a board member or the chief school administrator. That's true. When a majority of the board members are conflicted, the doctrine of necessity may be invoked so that the board can form a negotiations committee. That's false, correct. A board member whose wife's aunt is a paraprofessional in the district may not participate in the evaluation of the chief school administrator. That's true. A board member is a teacher in a neighboring district. The member can participate in the negotiations process for teacher's contract, but cannot vote on the final contract.
False.
False, that's correct. It's the opposite. They may be able to vote to ratify the contract, but not on any of the previous stuff. The assistant superintendent may not evaluate the principal in the building where the assistant superintendent's son is a teacher. That is true. Okay, you guys did good. Volunteerism. Volunteerism became an issue a couple of years ago, I think back around 15, 16. Board members, as I said, you care deeply about your communities and about your students. Board members are typically, this is a volunteer position, you do not get paid for this. You also pay property taxes. The people in my town, when I was coming off the board, thought that each board member made $100,000 a year in a salary and didn't have to pay property taxes. My husband went crazy. He was like, where's my 9 years of back taxes that I need to get back, and where's my $900,000? So you are people who typically are going to volunteer to do things, okay? You need to think of this in terms of infrequent volunteering, okay? A field trip, anything that doesn't have to do with or perceived to do with supervision of students or staff, okay? Class moms, you have to look at what the class mom's responsibilities are in that building. I have some districts where from building to building, class moms kind of job description or responsibilities differ. One building, it might be that they're in there once a month for birthday parties or something like that. In another building, they might be in there 3 times a week. 3 times a week, not recommended, okay? 1 time a month, fine. Any organizations that you belong to that may have anything to do with the school, PTO, PTA, special ed groups, booster groups, anything like that, don't have anything to do with, don't do anything with money, okay? Collecting money, distributing money, any of those things. It's an accident waiting to happen. It's a bad situation waiting to happen. And you really just need to be aware that when you're in the schools, following with the district's visitation policy, and you would always want to let the superintendent know. If a teacher asks you to come in and read for Read Across America, or asks you to come in to do a presentation about the job, your profession, always let the superintendent know, because that can alleviate some of those rumors that might be going around. Because even though you can't see it, think Harry Potter with the scar on his forehead, everybody else sees that you have board member tattooed on your forehead. And so if you go into the school and you now ask somebody to do something, you can be accused of directing a staff member or directing a principal. So you want to be really careful about those things. And when you go in, just, again, let the superintendent know. Mrs. Smith asked me to come in to read, to the students in class on this particular day. And then he knows that you're there, and he can let the principal know. Because sometimes that communication doesn't happen all the way down to the front office. And again, just never appear to be or give yourself the ability to be perceived as giving staff or the superintendent direction. As an individual board member, you do not direct the superintendent. Only the board does. It takes 5 of you on a 9-member board to direct the superintendent, okay?
And then one thing, there is an initiative, each one of us trustees adopt a local school.
Okay.
Where we go and we work like a liaison between the board
Sure.
and the PTO. What
You
do
go to
do
the
that?
events, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. You just need to make sure that you're not directing anything while you're there or appear to be supervising staff or students while you're there, and that you don't pretend or offer to speak for the board unless they've authorized you to do that. You're there to attend, to see, to be able to participate or to attend different events that are going on, and then be able to come back to the board and say, I went to the middle school concert, it was lovely, the kids were terrific, that we had, a terrific turnout, those kinds of things, okay?
Thank you.
That's all good. So this is a little thing that one of our field service reps came up with, and before you volunteer in the school, so if you answer the answers that are in green there, you're fine with whatever you're looking to volunteer in the schools with, okay? If your answer is different from any of those answers that are on there, then the volunteer event or action may be a problem, okay? So you want to make sure you're not being perceived as giving directions to students or staff. Case in point, when I was, my last year as the board president, my daughter was in the pit orchestra for the play, for the 8th grade, the middle school play. And my daughter is this big, and she plays drums. She couldn't play the flute. She couldn't play the clarinet. She had to play drums. So we schlepped drums everywhere we go. So we had to bring her drum set to the school, and we get there, and my husband is setting that up with her, and my husband comes over and he says, can you ask that one of the custodians if they have like a carpet or any kind of a rubber mat that we can put down underneath the drum set? And I said, absolutely not. And he said, why not? And I said, because I could be accused of directing, or it could be seen as me directing them to do that. So you can ask Lori, who is the director, if she can see if there's something, or I will drive home the mile to get the little area carpet that we usually put underneath her drum set, and I drove home and picked up the carpet so we could put it under her drum set. So it was not perceived that I was directing anybody to do anything. Okay? Interview committees, board member involvement in interviews for anybody other than the superintendent is really not encouraged. There may be exceptions in narrow circumstances to that, and they would have to be at the approval of the superintendent. If 1 or 2 board members are attending interviews, they should be in attendance only and observing. There would have to be an administrative staff person that was actually running those interviews and coordinating all of that. And any recommendation would come at the recommendation of the superintendent. So if there was that narrow circumstance where 1 or 2 of you were in an interview situation, you would be observing only, and you certainly wouldn't be making recommendations, okay? And exit interviews, absolutely not. Board should not participate in those. However, the board could say, if you notice that there was a lot of people that were exiting the district, you may ask the superintendent as a board, with 5 members of the board saying yes to this, we'd like for you to offer exit interviews to staff that are leaving, because that way it can give you some valuable information, and then ask him to come back with a report. It would all be anonymous, and it also wouldn't be, it can't be mandatory, because you can't mandate that somebody who's leaving sit down for an exit interview, but it can be offered. Okay? So some points to consider. Boy, am I good or what? We do recommend that you have that list, that you give a list of your relatives or immediate family members to your board attorney, and they keep that, because then they can let you know, they can give you a heads up as to what's on the agenda that you should recuse yourself from. Consult with your board attorney on any ethical issues on questions that we haven't answered tonight, some of the things that I've suggested that you talk to them about, and then continue to look at school board notes. Everybody should be getting school board notes at least once a week in your email. If you're not, send me an email. You now have the start of a very nice collection of business cards that you can use to wallpaper a small bathroom. And you can give me a call, or you can shoot me an email, and I will make sure that I find out why you're not getting those school board notes. It's a quick and easy read. I've included some of those on the left-hand side of the packet. Please don't forget to fill out the acknowledgement form, okay? You're just acknowledging that we've had this discussion. Print your name. Today's date is 2/25/2020, and sign it. And do you have any questions that I haven't answered already?
Social media, posting, emailing, how does one handle it where you don't violate the sunshine law?
Okay, so you never want to reply to all on any email. Any email that comes from the district should come from the superintendent or might come from the board president. And it should be one-way information only, so it should be information that comes out to you. And if you have questions or any concerns about that email, at the bottom it should say, please do not reply to all, but call me if you have any questions about this. Okay, you have to be very careful, because even just the chain, if you send it to somebody else, if you send an email to somebody else on the board that's been sent to you, and they send it to somebody else, and to somebody else, and to somebody else, you now have 5 people. And that's an Open Public Meetings Act violation, okay? So you have to be really careful about that. With Facebook and social media, there's a lot of promise with social media. For board members, there's often more peril for social media. So be very, very careful about what you put on social media. It can, even if you have a disclaimer, and in fact, one of the pieces that I have in here is about a situation. Commissioners says board members' blog posts merit 6-month suspension. This is in there also. A board member posted very negative and inaccurate and actually not factual information about a teacher and their salary, and said some really nasty and awful things about that teacher, said that he wasn't speaking for the board and that he wasn't speaking as a board member, he was speaking as a community member. They felt that it was blatant enough that it deserved, that it warranted a suspension. They did originally post a 6-month suspension, but because the decision was made after the board member had left the board, it was changed to where did it go? A reprimand, sorry. The word went out of my head.
One question about email.
Yeah.
So if you, as a board member, if you send an email to 1 or 2 or other board members involving business that has to do with the whole board, and you deliberately leave board members out, like, so if you send it to 7 out of the 9, you leave 2 out, is that a violation of the Sunshine Law?
You sent it to 7, that's a violation of the Sunshine Law. Unless you don't want to have a conversation, okay? So one of the things that we always recommend too is the no surprises rule. So if you know something that's going to be happening, you hear about something that's going to be happening at a meeting, excuse me, and you're thinking the meeting's going to be over quickly, there's not going to be any problem. By the way, that's the kiss of death, always. Don't even think that. Don't even let the thought enter your head. You want to let the superintendent and the board president know, okay? And likewise, if the superintendent or the board president hears something, or any of you, you want to let them know so that you can be prepared for that. So it's no surprises. But one of the things that we do suggest is when you get your board packets, that you look through that, and if you have any questions about anything that's in there, that you refer it to either the chair of the committee or to the superintendent or the BA, however you guys have decided that communication should be, because that's up to you guys to decide. And then that answer can come to you at the board meeting, because if one person had the question, probably another person did too. And that way it gives the superintendent a chance to look up the information if he needs to do any research on that based on your question, and present the answer to everybody at a board meeting, so everybody's getting it at the same time.
So an email or a text message to 5 or more trustees at the same time can be a violation or inappropriate?
If there's communication, then back and forth, yes. If there's communication that needs to go out to the full board, then it should go to the full board, and it should be one way only, to you. You shouldn't be responding, right, okay? Okay, thank you for all you do for your students, and it was wonderful seeing you all tonight.
Thank you.
So, Chris, you want to collect those?
Yeah. Don't be offended if I don't, if I say Merry Christmas.
Folks, we're here. Folks, we're on a real tight schedule, so let me catch up here. On our agenda, I'd like to bring you all straight to, you've received all the resolutions.
Yes, sir.
Anything that you didn't receive or might have been changed, I'm either going to do right now or we're going to do inside. I'd like you to turn to personnel. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Kopaz, C8, our harassment, intimidation, bullying report for the month.
Thank you, Dr. Maida. In accordance with the Bayonne Board of Education Policy 5512, during this reporting period, 16 incidents of harassment, intimidation, and bullying have been reported and investigated at the following schools. One incident at William Shemin Midtown Community School has been investigated and confirmed. Strategies and resources have been provided to the victim to assist in the recovery process. Consequences and remedial measures were given to the offender. All documentation is being retained by the anti-bullying coordinator. 6 incidents at Horace Mann, 3 incidents at Robinson, 2 incidents at Nicholas Oresco, and 1 incident at each of the following schools: John M. Bailey, Washington, Vroom, and William Shemin Midtown. In these 15 cases, there was no confirmed evidence of the investigated acts of HIB. Strategy, resources, and remedial measures were implemented. All documentation is being retained by the school anti-bullying coordinators. Thank you, Doc.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll ask you now to turn to your non-consent agenda. On Resolution D1, which you all received, Trustee Alonso submitted a resolution for a change of the school board election date to send it back to April. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be this April because we already missed the deadline. It would be for the following year. Obviously, Trustee Alonso is going to move that resolution. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on the resolution? As we pointed out in the finance meeting, and I go back to when the board was interested in a referendum, I went to Mr. Sloan, who was the city clerk at the time. He estimated that the cost of a special election, when it's not coordinated with a city or state election, is anywhere from $65,000 to $85,000. So I just want to point that out to the board. Those numbers probably have not gone down. If anything, they've gone up. So we have a motion and a second on that resolution. I will add it to the agenda. The next resolution is Resolution D2.
We're going to have a discussion.
Well, you have a motion and a second. We could vote on it outside.
What, without talking about it?
You want to talk about it, talk about it.
Well, I just feel like a lot of people might not have all the information
Okay.
to make an educated, appropriate decision.
The floor is yours, trustee.
So moving an election to April doesn't just change the day. It allows all the citizens of Bayonne to vote and have a say in the school tax levy. That's probably the most important thing. And Bayonne loves independent elections. We have the mayor and council in May, and school boards are usually in April, and it wasn't until Will Lawson moved it to November. So I would like just everybody to consider allowing the people of Bayonne to vote on their tax levy.
Well, Trustee Alonso, that's actually inaccurate. You wouldn't be voting on the tax levy, you'd be voting on the budget.
No, just the tax
budget
levy.
total. The citizens wouldn't be voting that it's okay for the school board to take a 2.3% tax levy.
No,
That's
they vote
inaccurate.
on a number. According to the sample ballots from Junior Maldonado, the county clerk, like North Bergen does, you vote just on the tax levy. The people of Bayonne can't vote on federal funding and state funding. So they would just vote on what's to be raised by property owners. Just the tax levy, not the whole budget.
Well, that's the way I understood, and that's why I second the motion. This, citizens should have a vote in the tax levy.
Right.
That's the only reason why I
Yeah,
seconded it.
citizens can't override and, reject federal funds or anything, but they just would have a say in the tax levy that's imposed on themselves, right? So they're gonna vote whether they like it or they don't like it.
Right, I'd also like to point out to Trustee Alonso and other members of the board that in 2011, Governor Christie encouraged all the school boards to move. It wasn't a Will Lawson move, it was a statewide initiative to move all of the elections for school board from April to November in a cost-saving measure.
Well, he only did that because he
Expecting-
cut all our state funding.
Well,
That
no, I mean,
covered
listen,
itself.
that's neither, what I'm saying is that expecting the school district to pay close to, I'm gonna round up to $100,000 for an election, when we could put that money in the classroom, put it into facilities, I think is a waste of money. That's why that was done. It wasn't just a Will Lawson move, this was a move done statewide. It was a statewide initiative.
That would be 100,000 every election that we would
Every
have
year.
to pay.
Yeah, every year. So every year we would have to put
That-
100 grand in our budget.
That is the salary of two.
Right, so there is an alternative, right? So there's definitely an alternative. We don't have to just move the election. We could just ask everybody in town if they want to move the election, and they'll know the cost associated with it. And everybody in here can decide if they want it in April with a vote on the levy, or if they want to keep it the way it is.
So you want us to put a referendum on the ballot?
A question on the ballot, and ask everybody in town if they want to keep it in November or move it to April.
Is that what this motion is? This motion is simply to move it to April,
This is
right?
not for a
Okay,
referendum.
So, so let's talk about that. And 100 grand, they're 85, 100 grand, I mean, I'm not ready to just assume that cost just because we think, if the citizens want to put it on the ballot, they can do a referendum themselves, they don't need us to do it.
And also, when we look at voter turnout, that in cities where they have an April election for school board and versus a November, the voter turnout is much lower in April
Correct.
than it is in November. So this is like suppressing almost the vote, because people won't come out as much to vote, where in November, they're already coming out to vote for other things, so they're more likely to come out and vote and have a say on the representation that they have.
And listen,
So,
Well, we actually don't know because we never tried it.
But actually, we don't have facts in front of us
In
now.
looking at other, well, that's how you kind of measure voter turnout, is looking at other districts. And when you look at other districts and the amount of voter turnout they have for November election and the amount of voter turnout they have just for school board election, it's extremely reduced. People have won seats on school boards with like 10 votes,
Yeah.
100 votes.
I'm not, right
So,
now, with the thought of $100,000, with the thought of what
A
else
lot of
we could
money.
do with $100,000, it makes the proposal a little less appealing to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, the point of this here is to have the discussion, like you pointed out.
All right, well,
I
I-
think it's here because we have to vote on it. That's not what I'm making you do. I put it here to Gary so we could talk about it at the
No, we
workshop.
actually are having to vote.
Well, but this is the only way you could open a discussion.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah,
I have
Just
no
so you
problem
know,
with
like,
that.
that's the
Yeah.
point of the workshop.
But we have no facts either at this point. so,
Right, that's why
I
we're
mean,
talking.
Yeah. so.
No, but we need to
$100,000
bring-
I'm not willing to
we
spend on an
have
election.
into exact
Not
price,
in April.
the voter, what
Can you
would
take
happen
that?
with
Take
voter
it
turnout.
Yeah.
Look at districts that do it
Tell him.
in April.
I
see
didn't
how-
realize that.
With what vote
District-wide.
members have won seats and how much voters have come out. See how many voters come out in November, because, you don't want to be the board that doesn't want.
If I could make a suggestion,
Work on some figures.
well, I was just going to say, if I can make a suggestion, Trustee Alonso, if you wouldn't mind, can we table this till March, and we'll try and dig up more information for the board? And we'll bring it, I'll put it back on for March?
Okay.
Great. I'm going to ask everybody to quickly turn to D2. I put some background information. It really was two reasons for changing meeting dates. Obviously, the budget calendar came out. The budget has to be to the county super on March 20th. So obviously, our original March board meeting date wouldn't work, and that's why we moved it to the 18th. Our snow days were the reason for the change in May, because if we don't use our snow days, the Friday before Memorial Day and the Tuesday after Memorial Day will be off. So it kind of limited me where to put the May meeting. And then in the summer, we go to a summer schedule with Fridays off for energy savings. And it would be difficult for us to you know, everybody's out of here at 3 o'clock on a Thursday, and we're having committee meetings at 5 and 6. So that was the reasons for the changes on the resolution. Just let me know what you want me to do.
It's not changing committee meetings, it's changing our public board meetings.
No, it's actually, will be changing. Any committee meetings in the summer that were on Thursdays would get bumped to Wednesdays. It's not on the resolution because
all
they're
right.
committees.
Okay.
But they will be updated on the calendar that I will follow up if this passes tonight. So really, we're talking about the board meeting days that I have to re-advertise by law.
So we're going Wednesday, March 18th, Thursday, May 28th, and Monday, July 27th.
Right.
Those are
So-
the board meetings, and then, okay.
Vice President Munoz wants to move the resolution if there's a second.
Yeah.
And a second by President Villado.
Our committee meetings, Jan, will then move to Wednesday.
The Wednesday before.
Well, let me go back and get the calendars, because we did do it. Trustees, before we adjourn to executive session, we're not really going to be able to go into executive session and start business. You got to give me 5 minutes to get down. We're going to start the public meeting at 8. I'll open the meeting, we'll adjourn to come back in executive session and finish our business. So, not hearing anything, we will adjourn to executive session for legal personnel negotiation items. It is 7:47. I've got to let